For centuries, Scotland's Picts were branded as vanishing spectres, blue-painted invaders who stormed from nowhere and disappeared forever. DNA evidence just cracked that legend wide open. The so-called mystery race were local Britons with ancient roots, their descendants quietly threading through millions alive today. But if the Picts never truly vanished, how did their identity become one of Britain's most lasting historical hoaxes? The truth upends everything you thought you knew about the haunted North, and the real story is only beginning. Long before DNA could whisper its secrets, the Picts haunted the imagination of outsiders. Roman generals, pressed against the northern frontier, wrote of wild Britons who stained their skin a ghostly blue and vanished into the fog. Julius Caesar, in the 1st century BCE, described the Britanni, not Picts by name, painting themselves with woad for battle, turning their bodies into living warnings. Tacitus, a century later, conjured images of blue faces among the northern tribes, but never named them as Picts. The word Picti, the painted ones, first surfaces in the writings of Eumenius around 297 CE, centuries after those first chilling reports. By then, the Roman Empire was crumbling at its edges, and new threats were gathering in the north. The name itself, born in Latin, was less a precise label than a rumor made flesh, a people defined by their supposed otherness, painted into existence by foreign pens. Medieval chroniclers layered on new mystery. Bede, writing in the 8th century, insisted the Picts had sailed from Scythia, a land of the distant east, only settling in Britain after being turned away by the Irish. He claimed their kings traced royal blood through mothers, not fathers, a detail as strange to his audience as their painted skin. Later, medieval tales grew even more elaborate, casting the Picts as a people apart, their customs and language lost to time. Each retelling made them less familiar, more spectral. Victorian historians, hungry for romance and difference, seized on these legends. In their hands, the Picts became a vanished race, exotic, primitive, and extinct. Artists painted them as half-naked warriors, eyes rimmed with blue, lurking in the shadows of a prehistoric world. Popular histories repeated the story of their disappearance as fact, turning the Picts into a cautionary tale, a people who came from nowhere and returned to nothing, leaving behind only carved stones and rumors. Through centuries of retelling, the Picts became less a people and more a mirage, shaped by fear, fascination, and the need for an ancient mystery at the edge of empire. Yet beneath the ink and invention, real lives waited in the soil, their stories hidden until science offered a new kind of evidence. The time had come to test legend against the bones themselves. On a windswept headland in Fife, archaeologists cut through turf to reveal the stone outlines of ancient graves. At London Links, the ground gives way to a cluster of rectangular cists, stone boxes built to cradle the dead, their lids still sealed after 15 centuries. These burials date to the 5th through 7th centuries CE at the height of Pictish power in the south. The cists lie in careful rows, some marked by carved symbol stones whose enigmatic designs have resisted translation for generations. Each grave holds not a legend, but a real person. Men, women, and children. Their bones shielded from Scotland's acidic soil by the stone that surrounds them. It is this architecture, stone cist burials, that makes London Links an archaeological gold mine. Where other cemeteries have been lost to time, here the bones endure, offering a rare chance to reach back into the early medieval world. Further north, at Ballintor in Easter Ross, the story repeats itself. Here too, 5th through 7th centuries, graves rest beneath layers of earth, their stone linings preserving the delicate remains within. The Ballintor Cemetery sits at the edge of what was once northern Pictland, far from the Roman world. Its burials echo those of London Links, hinting at shared customs across a fractured landscape. No lavish grave goods or warrior trappings, only simple ornaments and the silent testimony of bones. The careful construction of these cists and the absence of family clusters suggest a community organized by something other than bloodlines or wealth. Beyond the mainland, Orkney's windswept islands keep their own secrets. At sites like No of Skier and the Cairns, graves from the end of the Iron Age through the Pictish period hold individuals who lived and died before the Vikings arrived. Stone cysts here too have done their work, preserving teeth and the dense petrous bones that scientists now prize for DNA analysis. The Orkney burials form their own chapter, separated by sea and centuries of tradition from those on the mainland. Every excavation is a collaboration. Field archaeologists, often local to the regions they study, work side by side with heritage officers and museum curators. Their job is not just to recover the dead, but to ensure that each bone and artifact is documented, protected, and, when the time comes, passed along to the next stage. The remains leave the wind and rain behind for the filtered air and bright lights of the laboratory, where science takes up the search for answers. The myth of the vanished Picts is anchored at last in the material evidence of their own bodies, waiting for the secrets in their bones to be unlocked. Inside the laboratory, the first challenge is invisible. Scottish soil, rich in acid and centuries of rain, chews through ancient bone like slow fire. Yet within the stone cysts of Lundain Links and Ballintor, something survives. Petrous bones, the dense pyramid-shaped part of the skull that guards the inner ear. This is the gold standard for ancient DNA, holding fragments of genetic code when almost everything else has dissolved to dust. Technicians, suited head to toe in sterile coveralls, work in a sealed clean room, where every breath is filtered and every surface is bathed in ultraviolet light. Contamination from modern DNA is a constant threat. Even a stray skin cell could overwrite the centuries, so the team drills carefully, extracting powder from deep inside the petrous pyramid and, when possible, from the cementum at the roots of ancient teeth. The process is slow and exacting. Each sample is logged, weighed, and subjected to chemical baths that break down the mineral matrix, releasing DNA molecules into solution. Negative controls run alongside every extraction, catching the faintest trace of modern human DNA. The air hums with filtered ventilation, and every pipette tip is changed between steps. Early trials yielded disappointment, too little DNA, too much modern contamination. But advances in protocol and the stubborn density of the petrous bone finally paid off. From London Links, the team recovered enough genetic material to build a high-coverage genome over 16 times the depth of earlier attempts. Ballintor too yielded a near-complete genetic profile. Both sites produced several mitochondrial genomes, opening a window to maternal ancestry. Dr. Adeline Morez, one of the project's lead geneticists, later described the moment the first sequence came through. It was like seeing a face emerge from the static. The team knew then that they were working with real Pictish DNA, untouched for over 1,000 years. The results were checked and rechecked, compared against thousands of ancient and modern genomes to rule out contamination. Rigorous authentication, tracking patterns of DNA damage, verifying molecular age, and matching genetic sex to osteological analysis confirmed the data's integrity. The feasibility of extracting high-quality ancient DNA from Scottish soils, long doubted, was now proven. With these genomes in hand, the team was ready to test the deepest legends against the evidence written in bone. The sequencing results arrived in a torrent of data, over 8,300 ancient and modern genomes lined up against the newly recovered Pictish code. Each sample from London Links and Ballintor was measured block by block for its closest genetic neighbors. The expectation, shaped by centuries of legend, was that some distant signature would surface. A hint of Scythia, a trace of the exotic East, a genetic fingerprint to match the old tales. But the data told a different story. The Pictish genomes settled not with strangers, but with their own. Haplotype comparisons revealed a tight cluster with Iron Age Britons, the people who had lived in these islands long before Rome glimpsed the northern mists. There was no sign of an outsider wave, no hidden influx from across the seas. The closest matches were found in the DNA of those buried before the Picts were ever named, their roots winding deep into the soil of Britain itself. Researchers mapped the Pictish genomes against every corner of ancient and modern Europe. Patterns that might have pointed eastward simply did not exist. Instead, the Picts' genetic code overlapped most strongly with Iron Age populations from Britain, and with none of the continental groups once suspected as ancestral sources. The myth of a foreign invasion, of a people arriving suddenly, painting themselves blue, and then vanishing, collapsed under the weight of evidence. The Picts were not visitors. They were the descendants of the very people who had farmed these hills and fished these coasts for generations. The research team, led by Dr. Adeline Mores and colleagues across Aberdeen, Stockholm, and Liverpool, paused over the results. Years of speculation, centuries of myth, and the careful labor of the dig all came down to this: the Picts were locals. Their DNA was woven from the same threads as their Iron Age forebears. Their story one of endurance, not intrusion. This was not just a matter of ancestry. The findings challenged the core of the old narrative. The Picts did not burst onto the scene from some distant land. They grew out of the fabric of Britain, their genetic legacy shaped by continuity, not conquest. The evidence from more than 8,300 genomes closed the door on the idea of a lost foreign race haunting the margins of history. Instead, the Picts stood revealed as a people deeply rooted in the land, their identity forged across centuries of local evolution. The verdict from the genome was clear. The Picts were never outsiders. They were heirs to Britain's deep past, their bloodlines stretching back through the Iron Age and anchoring them firmly in place. The story of migration and mystery gave way to one of quiet persistence, a people who had always been here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for science to tell their true story. Identity by descent analysis traces the Pictish story into the living world, linking ancient genomes to people walking Scotland's hills and Welsh valleys today. When researchers compared the DNA from Lundin Links and Ballantor with over 8,300 ancient and modern genomes, a quiet pattern surfaced. The closest living genetic relatives of these early medieval Picts are not found in distant lands, but in the communities of Western Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Northumbria. Segments of DNA, long shared stretches that signal direct ancestry, appear most often in these regions, threading the past into the present. Modern Scottish and Irish families, often unaware of the legacy in their blood, carry blocks of DNA nearly identical to those sequenced from the stone cysts. In Wales too, the genetic echoes of the Picts are unmistakable, outlasting the loss of language and the erasure of names. Northumbrian lineages, shaped by centuries of border wars and shifting kingdoms, preserve traces of Pictish ancestry beneath later layers of Anglo-Saxon and Norse influence. This genetic continuity is not a ghostly remnant, but a living inheritance. The people once painted as outsiders or imagined as extinct are revealed as ancestors hiding in plain sight. Every shared segment of DNA is a thread that ties the present to the early medieval world, a reminder that the Pictish story did not end in disappearance. It carried on quietly in the blood of farmers, fishermen, and families who never left. The myths of extinction and foreignness fade against the evidence of living descent. The Picts persist, not as a vanished tribe, but as part of the hidden architecture of modern Britain. Their story, once thought to be lost, continues in the bodies of millions who never knew they were part of it. Orkney's story sits apart from the mainland. Ancient genomes drawn from graves at Knowe of Ski and the Cairns reveal a population with deep roots in the islands, genetically distinct from the Picts of Fife and Easter Ross. These Orkney individuals, dated between the 5th and 8th centuries CE, cluster with local Iron Age islanders rather than with any mainland group. Their genetic thread runs steadily through centuries of isolation. Only much later was it diluted by the arrival of Norse settlers. By the time the Viking Age reached full force, new DNA swept in. Today, modern Orcadians can carry up to 40% Scandinavian ancestry, a dramatic overlay on the original Pictish signal. This insular continuity, interrupted and reshaped by outside arrivals, highlights how the Pictish world was never monolithic. Regional differences, once guessed at from carved stones and pottery, now appear in the code of ancient genomes. The Orkney cluster stands as proof that the Pictish label once covered a patchwork of peoples, each with their own histories and connections. Legends of matrilineal descent, handed down since Bede, have long colored the image of the Picts. Yet the evidence from London Links and Ballantory tells a different story. Mitochondrial DNA from these cemeteries shows a wide diversity of maternal lines, with no sign of tightly knit female kin groups or exclusive inheritance through mothers. If matrilineal existed, it was limited, perhaps a custom of elite succession, or a fleeting episode rather than a rule for the whole society. For every ancient bone sampled, there is a negotiation. Heritage officers, archaeologists, and local communities weigh the value of scientific discovery against the duty of care owed to the dead. Agreements are drawn up, remains are repatriated when requested, and the results are shared with those whose ancestors may lie in the soil. The process is deliberate, shaped by respect as much as curiosity. Looking ahead, researchers plan to combine DNA with strontium and oxygen isotope analysis, hoping to trace the movements of individuals across the Pictish world. Each new sample is a promise that the story of these islands is far from finished and that the past still has questions to answer. Today, millions in Britain unknowingly carry the legacy of the so-called Picts in their DNA. As genetic science rewrites old boundaries, identity becomes less about legends and more about connection. Myths may vanish, but the bloodlines endure, reminding us that the true ghosts of history are never lost, just quietly living on in the faces around us.